Chapter 1. You're standing there watching her laugh at something he said, and it's not even what he said that sticks with you, it's how she laughed. It came out a little easier than usual, a little more open, like she wasn't thinking about how she looked or how it sounded. You notice the way she leans in just slightly, not enough for anyone to call it out, but enough for you to feel it. He didn't do anything impressive, didn't say anything special, and yet the energy between them feels lighter than what you've been getting from her lately. You tell yourself you're overthinking it, but your body doesn't agree with that. You try to shake it off because nothing technically happened, and that's the part that makes it hard to confront. There's no clear line crossed, no obvious disrespect, nothing you can point to without sounding like you're reaching. But something about it doesn't sit right, and you feel it in your chest more than your thoughts. You start replaying small moments like that, not just this one, but others you didn't fully pay attention to before. And the more you think about it, the more you realize it's not about him specifically. It's about how easy it feels for someone else to step into a space that used to feel like yours. You probably haven't said anything to her about it, because you don't want to come off insecure or controlling. You don't want to be the guy who questions every interaction or reads too deep into things that could mean nothing. So instead, you stay quiet, you observe, and you try to act like everything is normal. But inside, something starts shifting, and that shift changes how you look at the relationship. You start noticing patterns you weren't paying attention to before, things that seemed small at first but don't feel small anymore. It's in how she talks about other men. Not in an obvious way, but in a way that feels a little too comfortable. It's in how she engages when someone new enters the picture, how quickly she adapts her energy without thinking about it. It's in how boundaries feel slightly blurred, like there's no clear line that separates you from everyone else in her world. And the more you notice it, the more you start to question where you actually stand. Because a relationship doesn't fall apart from one big moment. It shifts through patterns that slowly redefine what's acceptable. You feel it when she doesn't check certain behaviors, when things that should feel off just pass without acknowledgement. You feel it when there's no sense of protection over the connection, like it's open to interpretation instead of being clearly defined. That lack of structure creates a kind of space where anything can happen, not because she's planning for it, but because nothing is really stopping it. And when that space exists, it doesn't take much for someone else to step into it. It doesn't take a perfect situation or a perfect person. It just takes the right moment with the right energy. What makes it harder is that you still care about her, and that care makes you want to give her the benefit of the doubt. You want to believe that she respects the relationship, that she wouldn't let anything cross a line that matters. But at the same time, you can't ignore what you're seeing and what you're feeling. Those two things start pulling in different directions, and you're stuck in between them trying to make sense of it. You don't want to jump to conclusions, but you also don't want to ignore something that could cost you later. You start to realize that loyalty isn't just about what someone does when everything is obvious. It's about how they carry themselves in situations that could easily go somewhere else. It's about how they manage attention, how they respond to it, how they move when there's opportunity for something to happen. And when those things aren't handled with awareness, it creates an environment where lines can be crossed without much resistance. That's when the relationship starts becoming vulnerable in ways that aren't always visible at first. You might think this is about trust, and in a way it is. But it goes deeper than that. It's about the dynamic between you and her, the level of respect, the level of awareness, the level of boundaries that exist without needing to be constantly explained. When those things are solid, situations like that don't feel questionable, they feel clear. But when they're not, everything starts feeling a little uncertain, a little open, a little too easy for someone else to step into. And that uncertainty is what creates the real problem. You don't need to wait for something obvious to happen to understand what's going on. The signs are always there before anything crosses a line, and they show up in ways that are easy to dismiss if you're not paying attention. The way she interacts, the way she responds, the way she carries herself around other men, those things tell you more than words ever will. And if you're honest with yourself, you've already seen enough to know whether something feels solid or not. That feeling isn't random, it's coming from what you're observing in real time. If you've ever had that feeling and tried to ignore it, you already know how that plays out. It doesn't go away, it just gets quieter until something brings it back to the surface again. And when it comes back, it feels stronger, because you've already seen enough to recognize it. That's why it matters to actually pay attention to it now, instead of waiting for something bigger to confirm what you already feel. Because by the time it becomes obvious, it's usually been building for a while. If this feels familiar in a way you didn't expect, don't just brush it off and keep scrolling. Say something below, even if it's short. Because that moment of recognizing it matters more than pretending it's not there. And if you want to understand this deeper, stay with it, because most people don't catch these things until it's already too late to do anything about it. Chapter 2. You notice it more when you're not even looking for it, like when her phone lights up and her expression changes for a split second before she even realizes it. It's not what she does after. It's that first reaction that gives it away, that small shift in energy that feels slightly different from how she reacts with you. You might not say anything about it, because it's subtle, easy to dismiss if you don't want to make something out of nothing. But once you see it a few times, it stops feeling random, and it starts feeling like a pattern you can't ignore. That's when your attention sharpens, even if you try to act like it hasn't. You start catching little things in how she communicates with other men, not in a way that's obviously disrespectful, but in a way that feels a little too open. There's a certain comfort in how she responds, a certain ease in how conversations flow, like there aren't any invisible boundaries shaping how far things can go. You might hear the tone in her voice when she talks to them, or notice how quickly she engages when they reach out. It's not about her doing anything extreme. It's about how natural it feels for her to entertain that attention. And when that feels natural, it tells you something deeper about how she sees those interactions. You might remember a time when she used to draw clearer lines, when there was a sense that certain interactions just wouldn't happen because of what the relationship meant. That sense of separation made things feel secure without needing constant reassurance. Now it feels a little more fluid, like everything is open to interpretation depending on the situation. That fluidity creates space, and that space is where problems start forming. Because when boundaries aren't clear, they don't need to be broken, they just slowly fade. There was a situation that played out quietly, the kind that doesn't look serious from the outside, but says everything when you really look at it. A guy reached out to her casually, nothing direct, just a conversation that started like any other. She responded without hesitation, kept the conversation going longer than necessary, and didn't shut anything down when it started leaning in a direction that felt more personal. It wasn't obvious enough to call out, but it wasn't neutral either, and you could feel that difference. Over time, those conversations became normal, and what started as something small turned into something that had its own momentum. The problem wasn't that she had one conversation, it was that nothing in her behavior made it feel like there was a limit to how far it could go. She didn't check it early, didn't redirect it, didn't create any distance that showed where the line was. That absence of boundaries made it easy for him to keep engaging, because there was no resistance to push against. And when there's no resistance, people keep going, not because they're forcing anything, but because it feels like there's room for it. That's how situations build, without ever feeling like they crossed a clear line at the start. You could feel the shift in how she carried herself after those interactions became more regular, even if it was slight. There was a different kind of attention she was receiving, and that attention started influencing her energy in ways she didn't openly acknowledge. It showed up in how she responded to you, in how present she felt, in how much effort she put into maintaining the connection. You might not have connected it immediately, but over time, the difference became harder to ignore. And once you saw it, it changed how you viewed everything else. That's what most people miss, because they're looking for something obvious instead of paying attention to what's consistent. It's not about one message, one conversation, or one interaction. It's about the pattern those things create over time. When someone is open to that kind of engagement without clear boundaries, it creates an environment where things can escalate without much effort. It doesn't require intention in the beginning. It just requires opportunity and comfort. And once those two things are present, the rest tends to follow naturally. You might feel like bringing it up will only make you look insecure, like you're overreacting to something that hasn't clearly crossed a line. That thought keeps you quiet, even when you feel something is off. But staying quiet doesn't change what's happening. It just keeps you in a position where you're observing instead of addressing it. And the longer that goes on, the more normalized those patterns become. What felt off at first starts to feel like part of the relationship, even though it shouldn't. At some point, you realize that respect in a relationship isn't just about what someone avoids doing. It's about how they naturally handle situations that could go somewhere else. It's about whether they create boundaries without being told to, whether they carry themselves in a way that protects the connection. When that's missing, everything starts to feel more open than it should be. And that openness is what makes it easier for other men to step in without needing to force anything. You don't need to wait for something obvious to understand what's happening, because by the time it becomes obvious, it's already been building. You've already seen enough in how she moves, how she responds, how she allows certain interactions to unfold. Those things tell you more than anything she could say, because they show you what's actually being accepted in real time. And if you're paying attention, you already know whether those patterns are leading somewhere you're comfortable with or not. That awareness doesn't feel good, but it's real. And ignoring it won't make it go away. It just delays the moment where you have to actually deal with what's in front of you. And once you start seeing it clearly, you can't go back to pretending it's not there. Chapter 3. It starts to feel like you're competing without anyone ever saying you are, and that's what makes it unsettling in a way you can't easily explain. You're in a relationship, but something about the dynamic makes it feel like your position isn't as secure as it should be. You notice how easily other men can step into conversations, into attention, into moments that don't feel protected. And even if nothing crosses a clear line, it still feels like access is too open, like there's no real separation between you and them. That feeling doesn't come from insecurity, it comes from what you're consistently seeing. You catch it in how she presents herself when she's around other men, not in an extreme way, but in a way that feels just a little too inviting. There's a difference between being naturally social and creating an energy that draws attention without filtering it. You can see when she leans into that attention, when she enjoys it in a way that doesn't consider how it affects the relationship. It's subtle enough to pass as normal behavior, but consistent enough to create a pattern. And once you see that pattern, it changes how you interpret everything else. There's a certain kind of awareness that should exist when someone is in a relationship, something that shapes how they move without needing to think about it constantly. It shows up in how they handle attention, how they respond to it, how they naturally create boundaries without being asked. When that awareness is missing, interactions start feeling more open than they should be. It's not about controlling behavior. It's about whether the relationship is being carried with intention or just existing without structure. And when there's no structure, anything can fit into that space. You feel it when she entertains attention longer than necessary, when conversations stretch past the point of being casual. You feel it when there's a certain tone in her voice, a certain energy in how she engages, something that feels slightly different from how she interacts with you. It's not always obvious, but it's there, and it builds over time. That buildup creates a sense that the connection isn't being protected in the way it should be. And when a connection isn't protected, it becomes accessible in ways that shouldn't feel normal. At some point, you realize that attraction doesn't need a perfect situation to grow. It just needs the right environment. When someone is consistently open to attention without clear boundaries, that environment starts to form naturally. It doesn't require intention in the beginning. It just requires space and comfort. And once those two things are present, things can develop without much resistance. That's why it feels so easy for other men to step in, because nothing is really stopping them. You might notice how she responds to compliments from other men, how she receives them without redirecting the energy or creating distance. There's a certain openness in how she takes that attention, like it's something she's comfortable with instead of something she manages. That comfort sends a message, even if she's not aware of it. It tells other men that there's room to continue, that the interaction is welcome, that it doesn't need to stop where it started. And that message creates a dynamic where things can move further without needing to push. You start to feel like you're the only one aware of it, like you're seeing something that isn't being acknowledged. That creates a kind of frustration, because you don't want to bring it up in a way that sounds like you're overreacting. At the same time, you can't ignore what you're consistently observing. That tension keeps you in a position where you're watching instead of addressing, noticing instead of acting. And the longer you stay there, the more those patterns settle into the relationship as something normal. It becomes clear that respect isn't just about avoiding obvious mistakes. It's about how someone naturally carries themselves when no one is checking them. It's about whether they create boundaries without needing to be reminded, whether they move in a way that protects what they have. When that's missing, it creates a kind of openness that invites situations you shouldn't have to worry about. And once that openness exists, it doesn't take much for something to happen. It just takes the right moment with someone who's willing to step into it. You might start questioning yourself, wondering if you're reading too much into things or if you're seeing it clearly. That internal conflict keeps you from fully trusting your instincts, even when they've been consistent. But those instincts are coming from repeated observations, not from imagination. You've seen how she moves, how she responds, how she engages, and those things don't lie. They tell you what's being allowed, what's being encouraged, and what's not being checked. The more you accept that, the more everything starts to make sense in a way it didn't before. It stops feeling like random moments and starts feeling like a pattern you can clearly see. And once you see it like that, you understand why it feels so easy for other men to step into her space. It's not because they're doing anything special. It's because the environment allows it. And that environment is shaped by how she carries herself and what she chooses to allow. You don't have to wait for something obvious to confirm what you already feel, because the signs are already there in how things have been unfolding. They show up in ways that are easy to dismiss if you don't want to deal with them. But once you've seen enough, ignoring it becomes harder than acknowledging it. And that's where you are now, whether you've admitted it out loud or not. Chapter 4. It gets quiet in a different way when you start pulling your energy back without saying anything about it. You're still there, still present, still going through the motions, but something in you stops leaning in the same way. You stop reacting to certain things, stop giving the same level of attention, stop investing in moments that don't feel solid anymore. And what's interesting is how quickly that shift changes what you start noticing. Things that used to blend into the background begin to stand out in a way they didn't before. You begin to see how she moves when you're not filling in the gaps, when you're not guiding the energy, when you're not carrying the weight of the interaction. The way she responds, the way she engages, the way she directs her attention becomes clearer. because you're no longer influencing it as much. That clarity can be uncomfortable because it shows you what's naturally there without your effort shaping it. You might notice how quickly her focus shifts, how easily her attention can be redirected when something new enters her space. And that tells you more than any conversation ever could. There's a certain kind of discipline that shows up in people who take their relationships seriously. And it's not something they announce or perform. It's in how they move when no one is checking them, in how they handle situations that could easily go in a different direction. It's in the small decisions they make without thinking twice, decisions that protect the connection instead of leaving it open. When that discipline isn't present, things start to feel loose in a way that's hard to define but easy to feel. And once you feel that looseness, it changes how secure everything seems. You notice it when she doesn't close doors that should be closed, when interactions linger longer than they need to. There's a difference between being polite and being available, and sometimes that line gets blurred in a way that creates space for things to grow. It's not always intentional, but it doesn't have to be for it to matter. What matters is that the space exists, and that space makes it easier for someone else to step in. It removes friction, and without friction, things move faster than they should. At some point, you start to realize that attraction doesn't always start with intention. It often starts with opportunity. When someone is consistently open, even in subtle ways, that openness becomes an invitation, whether it's meant to or not. It shows in how comfortable she is engaging, how relaxed she is in those interactions, how little resistance there is when things start leaning in a different direction. That comfort is what makes things easy, because nothing feels restricted or off limits. And when nothing feels off limits, boundaries don't need to be broken. They just don't exist in the first place. You might feel like addressing it would change everything, but there's also a part of you that knows the behavior itself is what matters most. Words can be adjusted, explanations can be given, promises can be made, but patterns don't lie. How someone consistently shows up tells you more than anything they say in a moment of pressure. And once you start focusing on that, it becomes harder to ignore what's actually happening. You're no longer looking for reassurance, you're looking at reality. That reality shows you how easily someone else could step into a situation where the connection isn't being actively protected. It doesn't take someone extraordinary. It doesn't take perfect timing. It just takes presence and opportunity. If those two things align in the right way, things can happen without much resistance. And that's what creates that underlying feeling you've been trying to ignore. It's not about fear. It's about recognizing how the dynamic is currently set up. You also start to see how your own presence has been received, how your energy has been responded to over time. You might notice moments where you felt taken for granted, moments where your attention didn't carry the same weight it used to. That shift doesn't happen randomly. It builds through repeated experiences that shape how she sees you. And when that perception changes, it affects how she interacts not just with you, but with others as well. Everything is connected in ways that aren't always obvious at first. You can feel when respect is fully there, and you can feel when it's starting to fade in small ways. It's not something that needs to be announced. It shows up in behavior, in tone, in how much consideration is given to the relationship in everyday situations. When that respect is strong, certain lines don't even come into question. But when it weakens, those lines start to blur, and situations that shouldn't feel normal begin to feel acceptable. That shift is where everything starts to change. The more you sit with it, the more you realize that what you've been feeling isn't coming from nowhere. It's coming from repeated patterns that have shown you exactly how things are being handled. You've seen enough to understand the direction it's moving in, even if you haven't fully accepted it yet. And once you reach that point, you're no longer guessing, you're observing. That observation gives you clarity, and that clarity changes how you move next. You don't need to force anything or create conflict to understand what's already in front of you. It's been showing itself in small ways, consistently, without needing a big moment to confirm it. And the more you pay attention to those small ways, the clearer everything becomes. Chapter 5. It doesn't hit all at once. It settles in slowly, like something you were trying not to see finally becoming clear whether you like it or not. You're not guessing anymore. You're not trying to piece things together. You're just looking at what's been happening without filtering it. The way she moves, the way she responds, the way she handles attention, all of it starts lining up in a way that makes sense now. And once it makes sense, it's harder to ignore than it ever was before. That clarity feels heavy, but it's real, and that's what changes everything. You realize that ease doesn't come from other men being better than you. It comes from how accessible the situation is. It comes from how open the dynamic feels, how little resistance there is, how natural it is for someone else to step into her space. That kind of access isn't created overnight. It's built through repeated behavior that shows what's allowed and what isn't. And when the lines aren't clearly held, they don't need to be crossed. They just don't exist in a meaningful way. That's why it feels so effortless from the outside. You also start seeing how much of this has been right in front of you the whole time. The signs weren't hidden, they were just easy to dismiss when you didn't want to fully accept what they meant. You might have brushed off certain moments, told yourself they didn't matter, convinced yourself you were overthinking. But now those same moments look different, because you're seeing them in context instead of isolation. And when you look at them together, they tell a story that's hard to deny. That story doesn't just reflect her behavior. It reflects the dynamic between you and her as a whole. It shows how things have been allowed to unfold, how certain patterns have gone unchecked, how the structure of the relationship has shifted over time. You're not just looking at isolated actions, you're looking at the environment those actions exist in. And once you understand that, you stop focusing on individual moments and start seeing the bigger picture. That bigger picture is what determines how easy or difficult it is for someone else to step in. You might feel a mix of things sitting with that realization: frustration, disappointment, maybe even a sense of regret for not paying attention earlier. That's normal, because you're processing something that changes how you view the relationship. But that feeling isn't where you stay. It's where you start making decisions from a clearer place. You're no longer reacting to confusion, you're responding to understanding. And that shift gives you a level of control you didn't have when everything felt uncertain. You begin to understand that what you tolerate shapes what continues, even if you never say it out loud. The way you respond, the way you carry yourself, the way you engage with what's happening all influence the direction things go. When something feels off and it goes unaddressed, it becomes part of the normal dynamic. And once it becomes normal, it's harder to shift because it's already been accepted. That's why awareness matters, because it allows you to break that pattern before it settles in deeper. At the same time, you stop looking for reassurance in her words and start paying attention to consistency in her actions. Words can be adjusted in the moment, but patterns don't change without intention. The way she consistently shows up tells you what's real, not what's said when things get questioned. And when you focus on that, everything becomes clearer without needing constant explanation. You're no longer trying to decode things, you're observing what's already there. That clarity forces you to decide how you want to move forward. Because staying in the same place doesn't feel the same once you see things differently. You can't go back to ignoring what you've already recognized, and pretending things are fine doesn't sit right anymore. You either address it in a way that changes the dynamic, or you accept that it will continue as it has been. That decision doesn't come from emotion. It comes from understanding what's actually happening. And once you reach that point, you move differently whether you realize it or not. If this hit in a way you weren't expecting, say something below even if it's just a single word that sums up what you're thinking right now. That moment of acknowledging it matters because most people sit on this kind of realization and never actually do anything with it. And if you've been seeing these patterns in your own situation, you already know how real this is. Sharing that thought might seem small, but it's the point where you stop ignoring what's right in front of you. And if you want more of this, where things get broken down in a way that actually makes sense of what you've been feeling, stay connected. Because once you start seeing dynamics like this clearly, you don't go back to guessing and you don't settle for confusion anymore.